Thank you everyone for joining us. We are now about to begin a panel on unlocking financial inclusion. Please feel free to enter questions in the Q&A box under the chat. The moderator will take them, time permitting. I will now hand things over to Angie Lau to begin the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, good morning to our friends in the US. You're all sipping on your cup of coffee, and totally appreciate you joining our friends across Europe. Good afternoon to you, and good late afternoon, good evening to the rest of you here in Asia where I am. This is truly a global conversation that we are having today because it is that critical, and we are talking about unlocking financial inclusion. I'm Angie Lau. I'm going to be the moderator of this very important discussion. I'm the CEO and founder and editor-in-chief of Forecast News, and we talk about blockchain and emerging technologies that shape our world. And none is shaping our world more than really what new technologies are unlocking for those who remain unbanked. It's my pleasure to welcome our esteemed panelists from around the world, and they are Makoto Takemiya, co-founder and CEO of Soramitsu, GBBC regional ambassador to Japan. Cristina Ventura joins us as well, founder VenturaXVentures, GBBC regional ambassador to Hong Kong. Chris O'Neill joins us, senior impact consultant, Akina Foundation, GBBC regional ambassador in New Zealand. And last but not least, Edward Sia, director, financial services volunteer corp, FSVC, all joining us today. But let me just preface this conversation by saying that what we're about to talk about is one of the critical sustainable development goals of the United Nations, and truly all of us. And we believe that financial inclusion is a right. But currently, right now, financial services and products, which is a proven driver of sustainable development and poverty reduction, isn't really being as expanded at a rate as fast as we would like. There remains some real challenges and lack of documentation, relevant products, things like mistrust toward financial institutions, even geographical access and high fees are among the many barriers to having a simple bank account or access to financial services. But what does that actually truly mean? And what can we be implementing, and most importantly, be thinking about as we apply technology, potentially blockchain? And so let me kick things off with all of you. And I'll note that Chris O'Neill and Edward Sia bring a perspective that I think would be very helpful in setting the stage. They work with people on the ground, countries that are trying to address the challenges of financial inclusion. And what are some of the experiences, Chris and Edward, that you can share from your work in your many years working with both regulatory bodies and also community groups and people that are unbanked? What are the challenges as we move forward, thinking about how we can apply technology like blockchain? And Chris, I'll let you kick it off.
Fantastic. Kia ora koutou, everyone. I'm joining you from New Zealand, where it is Te Reo Week, which is one of our national languages. New Zealand, I think, you look at a country like New Zealand and you think, it's a developed country, we've got a lot going on. But actually, you look below the surface, and many developed countries and developing countries suffer from similar challenges here, where we have to think about how do we get people to engage in the wider financial system. And as you've highlighted, we've got billions of people around the world who are unbanked. We've got billions and that means they don't have access to the same kind of capital, the same kind of systems that other people can access. And so the opportunity that we see here with blockchain is that we are able to, shortcut or jump over a lot of the hurdles that countries have had to develop over the years. So we've seen concepts like peer-to-peer, those sorts of concepts that are unlocking some of that access that you might look at, rural areas, for example, where, like you've highlighted, Angie, how do you document, who you are? For me in New Zealand, it's great. I jump online, I download, an invoice from, my broadband supplier, and I can prove where I live. I have a passport, I can prove who I am. But those are not things that are easily accessible if you live in, the far north of New Zealand, perhaps, or, the rural area of a developing country. So blockchain, when we talk about things like identity, when we talk about connection, there really are opportunities to unlock there. But also we have to recognize that the technological access is also limited in these places. So you see, places like Africa, Kenya, where mobile phones have become the dominant approach. So I think where traditionally we might think that institutions are the solution to some of these problems, I think what excites me about this space is that there's an opportunity to step away from the concept of one institution holding that control and actually people being able to connect to people to solve some of these problems.
And that truly is the promise of blockchain. Edward, I note that you've been with FSVC since 1998. You served, in fact, as regional director in East Africa for 3 years. You were country director in India for another 3 years. These are two regions of the world where it is it's renowned for the unbanked, those that are completely disconnected from really the mainstream system that the rest of the world enjoys. In your experience, in your work at SFVC, what are some of the realities that are on the ground that we have to think about as we incorporate how we might apply technology solutions like blockchain?
So thank you very much, Angie. This is my first foray into the GBBC world. So I'd like to provide a little bit of a description of FSVC for some of your members who probably don't know much about us. We're not a well-known institution. We don't fly a flag, and we aren't out there like the bigger consulting firms. But FSVC itself is a not-profit organization that was founded in 1990. Our mission is to strengthen financial sectors in developing and emerging market countries. It does so, and we do so ultimately by helping promote job creation, economic growth, improving quality of life for individuals. We structure practical, results-oriented technical assistance missions that are staffed by senior practitioners who serve as volunteers, and these unpaid volunteers would travel all around the world to meet demands and reform needs of any country looking to improve their financial sectors, introduce best practices, or really get with the fold. In our experience, especially in countries like India and Kenya and East Africa on the greater whole, we've seen that financial inclusion can play a huge role in bringing people into the formal financial sector. In cases like the M-Pesa case in Kenya, originally when M-Pesa started, I would say M-Pesa very much had the same response that people are giving to coins like coins that are out there today. The response was, the bankers that were in Kenya did not want M-Pesa to take shape. They didn't want it to be approved by the regulator. They thought that it would take market share away from the commercial banks and steal their customer base. In fact, FSVC consulted the central bank governor Ndungu at the time, and we advised him that M-Pesa had such great potential from a financial inclusion perspective that he really should consider moving forward and supporting the institutions, supporting the telecoms that were pushing forward for M-Pesa to take shape. Nowadays, you can find M-Pesa everywhere in Kenya. It's even transferable to other countries in East Africa. With M-Pesa, you can deposit into your bank account. You can put money in your pension fund. You can save for a rainy day, and you can do other things like be offered insurance products or others. I feel that technology such as mobile payments, even blockchain, has that potential. Blockchain's ability to access regions and individuals outside of the norm, outside of the formal financial sector, has great role to play in the future. I assume and expect within 15 to 20 years, as the technology becomes faster, cheaper, more simpler, individuals beyond investors, beyond financial institutions will enter the fray.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're seeing right now. In fact, I'll note that Makoto, you've done incredible work over at Soramitsu, which is a fintech company that specializes in blockchain technology. But you've also contributed to the technical vision of Hyperledger Aroha and also the Backong payment system in use by the central bank in Cambodia. This is the first large-scale CBDC that we're seeing in use today with real customers and money. This is one of those countries that we talk about when we think about financial inclusion. This is one of the countries that we are seeing in Asia in which a lot of sovereigns are adopting this blockchain type, ledger type, distributed type, central bank backed digital currency model to almost leapfrog into this century where we are seeing technology kind of create a new playing field. I'm curious over with your work at Cambodia and others, how you're seeing this being integrated to actually help include from a high regulatory level, everyone from all its citizens and all its participants in that sovereign economy.
Yeah, so it's quite an honor to be on this panel. I almost didn't make it, but I had to do some VPN hopping to get on. Yeah, we've been working actually with for the last 3 years with the Central Bank of Cambodia on creating a digital payments infrastructure that anyone in the country can access. And up until now, it's been a really cash-based system. And without access to digital payments, you're really limited by the geography that you happen to live in. You can't, trade with people at a distance. You can't easily make money and send money back home to your family as needed. It's really, it limits your opportunities in life. And the Central Bank of Cambodia, I think, was really visionary in seeing that and really, taking the lead and raising their hand and saying, this is something that that we can give to everyone who has phones. And in Cambodia, many people have smartphones now because it's a very young and energetic populace. And but at the same time, you also have to do this in a safe way. You have to be able to prevent financial crime and also be able to make sure that there's different safety nets. Like, for example, what happens if you lose your phone? You can't just have people lose their money at that same time. So using blockchain technology where you have kind of a tokenization of money, and you have these like tokens that act almost like a bearer asset, and you have the full traceability of where these tokens came from. This offers new opportunities for handling regulatory infrastructure. So you prevent different crimes, and you give, but at the same time you give everyone access to digital money. So I think initiatives like that are really exciting, and I think in the next 2 years, I think we can expect many other countries to have similar types of infrastructure. It's really an exciting time, I think, for a lot of these developing countries, because they also have, for the first time, ability to do digital payments and to buy things online that they didn't have before. So it's been a great to be a part of it. And I talked with Edward Sia actually in the past in New York about this. So he's also one of the very interesting people who are doing things in developing countries. It's quite an honor to be part of this thing.
Well, it's a testament to GBBC. They bring the best speakers, and it's an honor for me to help lead these conversations as well. And I got to say, the retail experience is critical here, because when we talk about the unbanked, we're really talking about how do you speak to a customer base. And I know of no better expert than Cristina Ventura. She was the former Chief Innovation Officer at Lane Crawford Joyce Group. This is Asia's preeminent luxury lifestyle group. But over at that group as Chief Innovation Officer, she nurtured and birthed incredible startups with a real vision on how to speak to customers in a really interactive and sustainable and impactful way. She is now, luckily for the rest of the ecosystem, started her own fund, VenturaXVentures. And so, Cristina, I've known you for the past couple of years, and what strikes me along with the rest of this panel is that we share a very similar DNA. It is about sustainability. It is about impact. And that's why we all kind of are drawn to this space. For you, with your experience with understanding customers from your your level of experience and now investing in companies that can support this ecosystem, what do you think is the most important factor when it comes to financial inclusion? Is it simply providing access, or is it something more? Is it about creating a new opportunity to engage in the global economy in a way that goes even beyond banking?
Definitely, Angie. Thanks for the introduction, and definitely we're very aligned. And you know how much we are all about financial inclusion at every level, at a global spectrum. So I'd like to maybe share and to build on what has been said, some examples on that. So I'm personally investing and supporting from startups to a bit more established companies that are the real example that this is possible. So to answer your question, is about new business models, new ways of seeing financial systems, and definitely the way that we can transact. So one perfect example could be Diginex, that you are very familiarized with. So Diginex, the CEO of is Richard Byworth, and Diginex Solutions, with Mark Bling as well being the CEO. I've been discussing these days with them, and I learned a lot thanks to this opportunity. So Diginex itself is the full digital asset ecosystem that will be listed, in fact, in NASDAQ next week. But then Diginex Solutions is using blockchain technology to help with education, transparency, and the security. So as a blockchain, we use blockchain as a trusted solution for these blogs to store information. So as we were discussing in terms of solving the problem of the migrant workers. So for example, to give you some numbers, there's 164 million migrant workers globally. So empowering them through this greater financial inclusion is definitely needed and game-changing for them. So I don't feel that blockchain is solving this problem, but yes, it's the enabler to give some potential solutions. So it's all about, of course, trustworthiness of the system and conscious on how to use the system. But if we have this greater education on the financial cost of the migrations, and having as well the smart contracts, the big challenge of the debt bondage that we know it's a real problem that affects 40 million people around the world. So this greater transparency on the recruitment fees, on preventing cases of exploitation, then as well to have the security of the employment terms. Ultimately, we will help to put these migrant workers in a position where they can participate in the local economy, and hence be financially included in the global system. So that's one, Diginex. There's another one that it's fascinating as well. So it's a Zero Cap, that they are probably on the call. So it's Trent Barnes, John DeWitt, and Ryan McCall. So they're, now in fact, I was doing research, it's crazy, 6,460 cryptocurrencies at the moment, with a market cap of 365 billion. But if we compare, with the Federal Reserve notes, there's 2 trillion of the worth of US Federal Reserve notes. So if we compare, there's still a lot of potential on, creating opportunities for the digital assets. So Zero Cap, what they do is to provide this frictionless liquidity and secure custody for clients that are looking to move in a seamless way between fiat and digital assets. So they are taking the responsibility as well to create a platform called Zero Cap Impact, that is a decentralized financial inclusion arm that it's helping to drive the social, political, and financial change to ensure that everyone can have access into banking and financial markets, which is fascinating. Even themselves, they are allocating their own capital to impact-driven initiatives. So they're building these 360-degree financial alternatives for global inclusion through leveraging their infrastructure, networks, and knowledge in the industry to catalyze financial capability in these emerging economies that we're discussing. So that's very interesting, because you will be able to offer to clients customized solutions to drive towards impact that we are discussing in the conversation. So you, as an investor, you will be able to allocate your own capital and digital assets into impact. And there are a couple more related to retail, to your point, Angie. One is Lablaco. So Lablaco is impressive. We worked with them last year. So they are creating this traceability through blockchain on clothing. So instead of measuring how much more you buy, they are going to measure how much more you exchange your clothes. Therefore, you give, you have credits for how many more times you are wearing your clothes. So it's purely sustainability. And of course, it can be possible thanks to the blockchain technology. So they have this impact design criteria that they have, on the supply chain, everything has to be traceable and sustainable. So that's, again, another example that this is possible. And to finalize, so the fourth example would be Wavia. So with Lisa Andrews, she's fascinating. I mean, it's really creating this platform to empower communities for impact. So it's about financial, human, and community capital. So it's all focusing on SDGs and ESGs. So to create this ecosystem where everybody can connect and everybody is included, everybody thrives. And I mean, if we think about, if we go back to our tribe times, everybody was part of a community. Nobody was left behind. So we are now, printing money, but there's a lot of people that is becoming, richer and more poorer. So why not everybody elevates and everybody is part of the community and everybody is part of this inclusion that we definitely need. So blockchain is an enabler to make this happen. And there's clearly solutions in the market already.
There are solutions in the market, but Chris, I'll point to you. You believe that blockchain has the power to increase equality if used right. So I'm going to challenge you to explain that a little further. You also note that there is also a risk that it could further entrench existing power dynamics if we are not careful. How must we be careful? How should we be thinking about that?
Yeah, great area to explore. So I think one of the things when we talk about financial inclusion is we have to be careful about what do we mean. Do we mean that people have access to just transfer money? Do they have access to credit? Do they have access to debt, equity, all of these different forms of finance? And one of the things that we see often with financial inclusion is actually the traditional conversation, the conversation outside this context and outside, the sort of work that Cristina does when she talks about impact, is actually it's just about helping people get into debt often. So I'm really fascinated with what is the opportunity that blockchain presents where we can start talking about building people's wealth in a more sustainable manner. So as we were talking the other day, if we look over the past, I think 40 years roughly, the return on capital significantly outpaces the return on labor. So those who have the capital grow the capital, but those who earn through wages are very slow incremental growth. And I think as we create new forms of finance, as we create new coins, as we create new ways of transacting with each other, we're presented with an opportunity there to think about how might we enable people to grow their wealth in a way that doesn't necessarily require stripping the world of its resources, and actually thinking through how might people use the knowledge they have or the social networks they have, or the one of the other things we talked about was the unpaid labor, for example. The work that somebody might do looking after their community is not financially recognized in our current system, but is actually a really important part of how we sustain our communities and grow those communities. And there are projects out there that are starting to look at that. How might we tokenize the concept of recycling? How might we how might we take the age-old concept of a time bank and globalize that so that different people contribute and bring those different skills together? So I think my thought there is underlying, how do we avoid just making the capital holders increase their sense of capital or increase the capital that they hold, and actually start to spread some of that around and create new forms of capital?
I mean, you're totally right. I mean, here in Asia, and Makoto and Edward and Cristina, you're all familiar with what Chris is talking about. There is still a thing called subsistence farming, and there is still a thing where it is hand to mouth, where it is what you can hoe from the land. There's no concept or ability to access products like insurance or borrow money to reinvest. It is simply what you can do. And if there is a drought, too bad. If there is a flood, you just got wiped out. And that is part of the story of financial exclusion. And so what are some of the dynamics that can be introduced via blockchain, via smart contracts, via access, via trust, that can actually allow nations and citizens in those nations to actually start evolving and going up the ladder of economic sustainability? Your thoughts?
Makoto, do you want to take that one?
I'll just put in a couple of thoughts, and then I'm sure Edward has lots of good ideas. But generally, there's quite a lot of empirical research that shows that if you allocate new money in the economy for new goods or services, so new productive output, you can actually create a lot of equality, and you get lots of new things that people need. And using market forces to determine where what kind of products are needed in an economy are really quite valuable. And so I think blockchain can help with that a little bit, because you do have the ability to kind of add a democratic or transparent voting process in the allocation of capital. And we're doing a lot of experiments in the open blockchain networks. We're working on a project called Sora. There's other I think very interesting experiments out there that are going on. There's no magic bullet, but I think using the technology as a piece of a larger framework or system can.
So to a point that Chris had raised about, and Angie, you too, what is actually financial inclusion? Normally, I would say that financial inclusion is providing access to underbanked and underserved portions of populations, right? In this case, in the discussion of blockchain and digital coins, to me, I would say financial inclusion happens when regulators and the institutions themselves, the financial institutions, come together to agree upon a minimum set of requirements for what you would call KYC, know your customer, or customer due diligence, that will allow previously unbanked, underserved individuals to have their first formal financial relationships. That means financial inclusion exists when individuals have simplified, quick, and direct access to financial products, savings, insurance, pension, even credit, without having to pay middlemen. As you mentioned, Angie, in Asia, even in the Pacific, we have cases where individuals are taking their debit cards, handing them off to other individuals who then travel by bus or by boat to the one ATM in a country. They take out the they conduct a transaction, they take out the funds, they bring it back by boat, by plane, by car, and 2 days later, the individual has been fleeced by the middleman. He's taken about 20 to 30% of the 20-30% fees. And that, I say, even though they have an account, even though they have a formal relationship, is not financial inclusion. Blockchain has the potential to bring about technology that can simplify that and actually give the individual direct access. I would say that would be the future for how blockchain can address that issue.
On another note, Angie, there's another company that we've been discussing with them, because there's a big, as you know, fake, market on in any kind of goods in China. For example, 50% of the wines in some areas is fake. So we're discussing with the Origin Trail. They're amazing. They work even with the government of China, which we feel is very important, that there's this connection with the government somehow, because they even connected with them to work with Walmart. So they are checking all the traceability of the supply chain. They started with food, because it's the more natural thing for healthy reasons. As we know, there has been a bit of challenges lately. And then, of course, in just normal goods, in terms of how everything has been traced to be able to sell the real things to the customers, from food to wines to, anything. So they do, for example, certification. They do as well all the trusted factory. They have all the food system. They do as well fashion and traceability itself, enterprise data, and as well the industrial data and marketplaces. So I feel it's super interesting to see that it's not only one point. It has to be, and all the different blocks of the supply chain supported by governments to make sure that everybody is aligned on the same intention, which is at the end of the day, enhance customer experience and ensuring trustworthy and transparent applicability to everything that we do.
Cristina,
we're at a. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Edward.
Cristina, I think that that's a great example with counterfeit wine, other products that are produced. I also believe that blockchain has potential for governments themselves in their public financial management and budget process. I could imagine a world where governments have their procurement all on the blockchain. I've spoken to Sandra Rowe of the GBBC about this, and we've proposed how FSVC might support countries that are willing to try this model, where individuals, private citizens, might be able to vote on procurement decisions or government decisions on contracts with foreign partners or trade relationships, all on blockchain platforms that are transparent. And those transactions then are recorded on a potential blockchain where you can see what the government has spent your taxpayer dollars on. That type of solution could have roots in many parts of Africa and South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific.
I love you mentioned that, Edward, because in fact, we are now in connections with the government of Singapore here. We have a big group tomorrow meeting GBBC people and all the blockchain community in Singapore, because the government is very open to try new things as well. As you know, they're very open to approve a lot of laws on the exchanges, like Equus, for example, is here from DigiNext. So there's a lot of companies that now they are considering to set up in Singapore because the government is supported to all this. So to create smart cities that everything can be traced and can be proven that it's possible on a smaller scale. And then to your point, hopefully it can self-monitor and self-govern itself by itself, yeah.
That's a great point in terms of how the role of governments and regulators must be seen as leaders. But at the same time, the technology allows the individuals to be leaders as well, if you think about the governance ability, to your point, Edward, that blockchain can enable. So I'm curious about where we are right now at the crossroads of the technology. So it really appears that we are on the cusp of greater change. And if we look behind the system in which we currently exist, the SWIFT system, the US dollar is a global hegemony, central banks, et cetera, is this going to make way, or is blockchain going to make way for more engagement, and not even and when I talk about financial inclusion now, I'm talking about everybody, everyone who's currently either existing on or off this global economy. Is there a new financial inclusion system that can be created by blockchain? And what is the promise of that, and what could it be, and what kind of thinking do we need to apply to ensure that it is equitable, it is equal, and it is sustainable? And I'll open it to all of you.
I'll just put in a couple.
Or Makoto. Okay, go ahead.
Yes. I'll just put in a couple of thoughts about this. I think that one of the really exciting areas in blockchain is that they're including governance along with the technology and the asset creation and allocation process. And so we're actually experimenting this with one of the projects that we're doing called Sora, where we're trying to create a sortition-based governance system where different users are randomly selected to be on committees, and then they make different decisions for the rest of the network. There's also other interesting systems with direct democracy, using things like token voting. There's a cool system called Polkadot, and in Polkadot, you can actually vote with tokens, and then you lock up your tokens to give greater voting power. So if you're more passionate about some kind of referendum, you can actually pay an economic cost to increase your voice, which is good and bad, but it's an interesting experiment. And I think that's really where what we'll see in the next year or two, where the innovation is really going to take place in the blockchain space.
That's really cool. Chris, what do you think the holistic approach should be when we apply our thinking to potentially blockchain solutions?
Do you want to ask that question in a slightly different way? I'm trying to dig into what you want to explore here.
I want to explore how we should be framing our thinking. Blockchain is one solution, but it is also bringing to life a new system potentially. And so how do we apply best practices thinking to a new system that's being created right now because of blockchain?
Yeah, I think what's exciting is actually the diversity of solutions that you're seeing, because I don't think anybody knows what the right solution is. You know, as Makoto was, highlighting, there are so many different ways we can vote. There are so many different ways we can apportion power within these structures, within, decentralized organizations, within financial structures. So I think what's exciting is that unlike, you might have a single country with a single economic system where you've got a single dollar, a single central bank, and a single government, and they define and dictate what that vertical is of all of those rules. I think what's really exciting with blockchain is that, if I'm a farmer in a rural developing country, I can choose to engage with a platform, assuming that I can overcome the technological hurdles that will empower me and be, connecting for me. Or I might be, somebody in Silicon Valley who bought blockchain 10 years ago, or bought Bitcoin 10 years ago, and is sitting there, on a big stash, and is really focused on, what's the economic growth of my economic token here. So for me, I don't think there is a right approach, and I think it's about the more we develop really interesting solutions, the more opportunity there is. The risk there, of course, is that people engage in solutions that they don't fully understand, right? So, some of the governance systems become pretty complicated pretty quickly, and you'd be a pretty smart person to stay across every single governance model that's being developed right now. So, again, when we think of inclusion, literacy is a key element of this too, right? Like, how do you become literate in all of these elements? It's a step to become financially literate, but then to become blockchain literate is a whole nother level. So for me, a lot of it is about the transparency or the invisibility of the technology potentially at times. It's a bit like, do you want to be in blockchain as a hobby, or do you just want to be able to drive your car, right? You can either be somebody who can rip apart an engine and put an engine back together, and that's great for some people. But when we're talking about broad scale financial inclusion, we're really talking about an invisible blockchain in many ways that is enabling a solution, and it's just the tool, it's just the engine inside the car, and people have to learn how to pick the right car for them.
That's absolutely right. It is the integrity of the code, essentially. And so how do you make sure that we make sure that the integrity of the code includes the sustainable development goals that we all really share? Makoto, you go ahead.
Can I add something to Chris's point? I also believe that the integrity of the transaction is critical. Regulators around the world, if digital coins and blockchain will take their role at the stage with the mobile payments and other more traditional payment features, they will expect and they will want to have access to these transactions, access to the originator, access to the recipient, not in all cases, and not for Big Brother minding every single transaction that's being done, but for purposes of money laundering prevention and terrorist prevention, you will have to have access to those transactions so that law enforcement and other bodies can potentially trace the movement of the funds that are going through different channels and different institutions or individuals. I would say blockchain needs to think about how they can provide that information in a prudent and respectful way to the users. Of course, privacy is a critical aspect of the goal and the demand for digital coins, but you had to look at the regulators. They will demand it. They will expect that this is, if you're going to be a formal financial instrument, they will expect this to take place. And conducting illicit or illegal business, supporting sanctioned countries, or supporting terror is not the message that blockchain or digital coins wants to portray.
But isn't that an interesting, who defines the terrorist, right? There's that old phrase, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. So it doesn't blockchain have both that Pandora's box element of saying, actually, we can, it enables some organizations and some approaches to move away. You look at Belarus, you look at the approach that was being used there, where people were using blockchain to move money in to support people who were losing their jobs because they were being politically active. So I think the really interesting challenge is, in a global context, who gets to decide who the rules are? And we're seeing this more and more, right? With TikTok, decide who gets to decide who owns what, who gets to decide which technology resides where. And concepts like know your customer are going to have to be reimagined and rethought through, because how easy is it to verify, that somebody living in, a rural developing country is who they say they are? And it might be that we have to abstract away from the identity of the person and start to use other technologies to look at, well, where are these transactions going? How can we identify which transactions are actually transactions that we need to question? Because ultimately the individual, in some cases, is going to be super hard to nail down.
That is absolutely a great point. It's not black and white. It's very gray, depending on the perspective, obviously. But for fear of it becoming a political conversation, it really does open the Pandora's box of all of that. And so I kind of want to ask Cristina, the retail person, the one who knows the customer the best. I mean, you helped Apple grow its Hong Kong, China business. So really understanding the customer and its needs in the region was critical. What do you think that in terms of blockchain, the promise of blockchain as it pertains to the individual customer? I mean, if you take a look around the world, even those who are financially excluded still get their hands on mobile, which gives them access to the internet. There are more and more connected people every day. So how should we be thinking about how to engage with the everyday man, woman, and child?
So that's a brilliant question, in fact, Angie, because that's so important nowadays, the knowledge of what's going on into the blockchain and all the digital assets aspect, that we cannot ignore the fact that is there, so how do we know and how do we learn from the right sources on the right kind of context without, listening too much to the noise? So education is crucial. So I follow, very carefully all what you sent. Forecast News is definitely a very strong and trustworthy source. That's very important. Another one as well is continuous learning on the different sources and to compare as well where all these sources are coming from, because the information is there. I mean, a lot of Telegram groups to understand the different sources and to verify, because there's no right or wrong. Sometimes it's just different perspectives. So education, continuous learning, and as well to include all this education into the system of universities or even schools, so I can see how this is going to influence the next generation Z and the ones that are being born now. I can see, with my nieces, they're all tracing directly. Everything is mobile, so it's going to be like inevitable. The change is there. I believe there will be like a leapfrog on, a lot of these technologies in developing countries like here in Southeast Asia and definitely in Africa. So that's already happening. So how can we enable and how can we support as well this growth through the proper sources like GBBC, like Forecast, and like any platform that enables this knowledge and this trustworthiness on the, what's going on. And of course that it's regulated, if possible, that supports the government supporting them somehow. That means that all the stakeholders are connected and are in agreement that something can be applicable. So it's all about to know your customer. I love this question as well. We discussed with Chris before. So know your customer, it's, just your background. But what about if we really go into know your customer more at a human level, not just on your, bank account? What if we have, this more financial inclusion from the human point of view, from the, a human financial capital? So who are you as a person? So what did you do to impact the community? What did you do to, to bring this economic growth to your, tribe, to your community, to your company, to people that is really close to you? So the reputation is very easy now. It's very easy to do a due diligence of different type of companies. So how can we put this into action? Innovation at the end of the day, is creativity into action. So how we become more creative in understanding what's needed. Creating new business models that can influence and can integrate and everybody can benefit, because otherwise what's the point of creating something new if all of us, we are not benefiting and we're bringing the abundance, that there's unlimited abundance for everybody in every single type of growth. I mean, we can just follow the ecosystem, So ecosystems are there to continue grow and to continue adapt to what's new. So COVID has been perfect because many companies now, for example, they are accelerating their digitalization and adapting into the business needs instead of 5 years at 8 weeks. That's real numbers, So how we bring as well this digitalization into the financial transactions and into anything that is connected to all the transactions that we do. We do thousands of transactions a month. So why we do not open as well through all these new blockchain technologies that enable a much more open, trustworthy, and transparent way of doing business. So let's work together on finding these solutions in a very innovative, in a very inclusive way. Because at the end of the day, we need all to evolve. We need all to advance as a community. So let's create, with a Harvard professor, we are working on a book on that. Let's create human metrics that, are just beyond the normal KPIs. Let's create metrics for the ESGs, for the SDGs in companies, in corporates, in institutions, in startups, in governments. Let's all bring together this common language of understanding that we all move forward to creating the future and the world that we want to be part of.
And that's really what the promise of blockchain enables us to really dream about, Cristina, and the rest of the panelists. We've all really kind of discussed this new promise. But at the end of the day, is financial inclusion about the current inclusion in the current system, or can it be something bigger, which is creating a new economic system that truly values beyond products that we create, beyond services that bridges or credits the intermediary? Is it something more, and what is it? And we're starting to see that now with sustainable development goals, with sustainability and ESG. And that's certainly a language that we're learning. Impact as a value, as a product, as a commodity. That's truly the promise. I want to thank all of you, Chris, Makoto, Cristina, Edward, for this fascinating conversation, taking us from financial inclusion in the current system to creating something that could include all of us in a much more meaningful and richer way. So I want to thank you all, to our panelists, a big round of applause, a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
And lots of likes to this group here. And it was a pleasure. And thank you everyone for joining us on this conversation, and it continues throughout GBBC, and we will see you there. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank